Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for joining us this week. This week we focus on the fact that the hinterland communities continue to be underdeveloped and that could have serious effects on our country as a whole. To discuss this with me is leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition, Mr. David Granger. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, Malika.
All right. First off, Mr. Granger, what do you believe would be the effect generally on Guyana if the hinterland communities continue to be underdeveloped? And I'm talking about focus on things that affect the development of the hinterland communities, for example, public security. Sir.
Well, the hinterland comprises about 75% of Guyana's land space. It is also the area that is richest in timber and minerals. It's also the area in which the majority of our Amerindians live. And it is, well, an area of great potential. If it is underdeveloped, if it does not provide the resources, the assets, the infrastructure, we will not be able to derive the fullest benefit from it. So we lose because the land is there anyway. People are suffering. It's a case of the grass is growing but the horse is starving. And we're sitting on a country, a land space, territory, which is bigger than any other Caribbean country. So it is a self-defeating policy not to develop the hinterland. And I think over the years, at least over the last 21 years, the People's Progressive Party, Civic, has pursued a policy of almost, you can say, underdeveloping the hinterland because they provide a few gifts and tokens and trinkets, like the Dutch settlers did, 300 years ago. But the real development of the people and the resources have not been able to keep abreast with the needs of modern society.
Do you believe this situation or this position is intentional by government, or I should ask, can they afford to develop the hinterland communities?
Well, can we afford not to develop it? It's bound to be intentional. After 20 years, it has become obvious to everyone that the country is not being developed, the hinterland is not being developed. Let's say, for example, on the day of the United Nations Indigenous Peoples Day, you had members of the Akawaya and other communities in the Upper Mazuni coming to Georgetown to picket outside of the National Assembly because of land rights. So any boast that the government is looking after Amerindian land rights is bound to be false. So that's a big problem. Another problem is the problem of infrastructure. Hardly a week passes that we don't read of some serious accident. Some truck overturning, some bridge collapsing in the hinterland, some road impassable. And when I talk about hinterland, I'm also including, Kokwani Taichoni. And these areas are not being developed. Now, when a road or a bridge is not functional, it means that the farmers cannot get their produce to the market. It means that people who are ill cannot be taken to the hospital. It means that children cannot go to school on time. It affects development. So when you look at what has been happening in the hinterland, you can see that it's still an area of neglect. And I think the infrastructure jumps out, maybe foremost because people cannot access the resources which in turn could enrich the country and make people's lives better.
You spoke about roads, infrastructure, and you spoke about maybe an accident or two. The question might be, how do we solve these problems? Because you have serious accidents or people living on the coast. We have some of the same problems. So I don't know if you can do a bit of a comparison with the two, the hinterland region versus the coastal line. What is it that we have more that they don't have in those hinterland communities, and how can we solve the problem?
Well, we have population, and I assume that the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration is paying attention to certain population centers where their voters are and where most people live. And they feel that they can pursue what I would call a policy of patronage in the hinterland communities. They would just turn up and donate some chainsaw, donate an ATV or an outboard engine, and get the votes of the population there. But these do not represent real development. People want to get roads to take their produce to market. They want to get proper education facilities. They want to get boats that can take their sick loved ones to the hospitals. And these things are not happening. So the PPP administration is pursuing a policy of, I would call it maybe benign neglect. You know, it's not hostile, but they're certainly neglecting the hinterland.
Let's talk about the rights of our hinterland people. Are their rights being trampled upon, or I should ask you, do they even know their rights?
They know their rights very well, because at the time of independence, the People's National Congress had established what is called the Amerindian Lands Commission. And for the first time in our history, an attempt was made to ensure that the indigenous people are given sufficient land to live and survive on, because people on the coastline probably look forward to having a house lot or a small farm. But in the hinterland, the form of agriculture that is used, the form of settlement, the hunting grounds, the fishing, the creeks and rivers that are used for fishing, the rivers that are used for water, they form a whole community. They cannot be divided up as we do it on the coast. And yes, they have rights, and those rights are enshrined not only in the Constitution of Guyana, but also around the world. The rights of indigenous people are recognized. So they do have rights, and the PPP must ensure that those rights are safeguarded.
Okay, and do you believe that if those rights are safeguarded, you can probably have a more streamlined hinterland community where all of Guyana can probably benefit from the community's development?
Well, it is a source of distress for the indigenous people particularly, because when miners invade their lands, or whether when creeks and rivers are polluted, or whether they denied access to lands which are rightfully theirs, we do not give the people the sort of quality of life which they deserve. So I would say, yes, it certainly damages their lifestyle and their livelihood if these rights are not guaranteed, and the government has a responsibility to do that.
Well, my next question, I'm probably asking you to look into a crystal ball. And the question comes because I know the People's National Congress reform recently took, if umbrage is the right word to use, with statements of the head of state saying that, look, the development of the hinterland communities began when the PPP went into office. Do you believe, had the PNC stayed in government, the position or the living conditions, the standards of the hinterland communities would have been better?
Well, I have no doubt about that, because in the major area, the two major areas, the PNC had taken initiative. In fact, all four hinterland region. In the Mazaruni-Kuyuni in particular, we had a plan for a road network connecting. In fact, you would have been able to travel from Bartica right through to Lethem, from Bartica to Anai, and then Anai to Lethem. We also had signed an agreement with Brazil for the construction of the Linden to Lethem highway. We also developed airstrips. So there was significant infrastructural development. We had introduced agricultural plans, and in fact, as I mentioned on the previous program, the biggest potatoes I've ever seen in any country, the biggest tomatoes, were coming out of the Pacaraimas, but they needed roads. We had introduced a system of education in the Barima-Waini region. At Hazaroro, we had an agricultural station which is also being used as an agricultural institute where people could be trained, farmers could be trained. New agricultural techniques, they could have been given planting material to improve the quality of their crops. So I would say that if the PNC had remained in office, certainly the development of the hinterland would have moved much further are much faster than it's moving at present.
Would you say that our hinterland communities are vulnerable when it comes to exposure to banditry?
Well, not only banditry. Banditry is a big problem. Bandits go because there's a gold rush on. Even though the price of gold has dropped slightly, many persons have flocked to the hinterland, and bandits have gone after them in order to rob them. There's no doubt that that is happening. The murder rate in the hinterland is completely out of proportion to the small population. But there are other crimes, and maybe the one that should concern us most is trafficking in persons because of the gold rush. Many miners have gone in there, and there's evidence, substantial evidence, that young girls, underage girls, have been trafficked. They've been taken from places on the coastline or elsewhere and taken into mining areas and made into sex slaves. And I say this because some people are trying to prove that these are mature prostitutes, but it turns out that quite a few of the girls who have been rescued by the Guyana Women's Miners Organization are actually underage girls. And there's no way you can say an underage girl is a prostitute. It's obviously forced sex. So I would say that the banditry is a big problem, and the police are not capable of dealing with the banditry problem. Then you have the trafficking persons problem. But in addition to that, you also have gun running and trafficking in cocaine. Because of our long borders, we have a long border in Brazil and also in Venezuela. Maybe together the two borders come up to about 1,800 kilometers or thereabouts. And the police force simply does not have the resources to patrol and secure those borders. The result is that guns come into the country, and many of the guns we see being involved or being used in crimes on the coastline have to pass through the hinterland. Maybe not all, but certainly a significant amount to pass through the hinterland. And the cocaine, very frequently we hear about cocaine being smuggled out of Guyana. We know Guyana doesn't produce cocaine. It means that the cocaine had to be smuggled in the first place. Again, much of that probably passes through the hinterland. In terms of the illegal aircraft landing on airstrips and bringing in cocaine. So all of these crimes make the hinterland a very unsafe place. And they're unsafe for girls, they're unsafe for minors, they're unsafe for the entire country because of gun running and cocaine smuggling. But there's also a threat of other forms of lawlessness because of disputes about land and all that, and interpersonal violence. Sometimes maybe people get into drinking, and of course this might be among miners or loggers or other persons in the hinterland. I'm not trying to blame a particular category, but the disorder very frequently results in murder or wounding. So what we see is that from a public security point of view, the hinterland is becoming an increasingly lawless place, and as a result, it would be a disincentive for persons to invest. It is a deterrent for investment. So the crime is, apart from the indigenous problem, that the indigenous people are being treated in a discriminatory manner, the public security problem is also keeping our investors out.
All right. Certainly a lot coming out there, but I just want to focus a little bit on trafficking in persons. Now, APNU and David Granger were more or less adamant that, look, trafficking in persons really exists in Guyana. I'm asking you now, sir, if you feel a sense of victory in the fact that we're seeing that it is really happening despite recent comments. Of course, I'm not going to repeat the exact phrase of Mr. Clement Rohi, but do you still believe that trafficking in persons in Guyana is an issue, even though Mr. Rohi is saying that it's not a social issue? He used another phrase to describe what really is happening instead of trafficking in persons. Do you feel it's a social issue?
Well, we feel vindicated. I don't see a victory because there are no grounds for claiming a victory until trafficking is completely wiped out.
Okay.
But what I see is that we have been able to call attention to the fact that trafficking does exist. And in fact, Ms. Simona Brooms from the Guyana Women Miners Organization and members of Red Thread and members of Help and Shelter and other NGOs had been involved in it before, but we were able for the first time to bring it onto the floor of the National Assembly and have a resolution passed. So yes, I feel that we've made a contribution, but other hands are helping to deal with this scourge. Now, the debate in the National Assembly was very interesting because many people on the executive side were pretending that what we are calling trafficking was really prostitution. I insist that anytime underage girls or boys are carried into the hinterland and are forced to engage in sexual relations with adults, it is a crime, it is trafficking. So I don't know how the government will twist and turn, but it is a crime and it has to be punished, treated as a crime and punished as a crime. You cannot have a young person, aged 13 or 14, voluntarily going into prostitution. It's a contradiction in terms. You know, the person has not reached the age of consent and therefore cannot legally engage in sexual relations with any other person, whether the person is an adult or not.
I know you touched on it a bit earlier. How do we protect those long borders, or if you want to say secure those long borders so our hinterland people can be safe?
There has to be police reform. The present administration seems to be infatuated with community policing and neighborhood policing. But in fact, the regular police force has to be provided with the resources, with the assets. You cannot, patrol 17 or 1800 kilometer border on foot. You have to have aircraft, and the police has no aircraft which can do that sort of surveillance work. You have to have all-terrain vehicles so that people can move from place to place. You have to have sufficient policemen, and I am informed that the police force is about 20 or 25% on the strength. Every day somebody leaves the police force, sometimes through dismissal, sometimes through retirement, resignation, or death, but they are not being replaced in sufficient numbers, and as a result of that there is what we call attrition. The force is hemorrhaging. That is, more people are leaving than are coming in. So you need to bring the police force up to strength. You need to ensure they're properly trained, and you need to give them the resources. The patrol boats, they patrol the ATVs, and also the patrol aircraft. Land, sea, and air resources or assets must be given to the police force.
I know you're not the government, but what will it take to bring the police force up to strength? Because we've been hearing this for years now. Will it take some sort of disaster, major disaster in the hinterland communities? What will it take for government to bring the Guyana police force up to strength?
Well, we've done what we could do from the floor of the National Assembly, and we are keeping the pressure up. I cannot say what else needs to be done. We have brought a motion. Well, now we can call it a resolution against the Minister of Home Affairs, asking for the revocation of his appointment. And we continue to provide advice on ways and means for improving the security of the hinterland. But short of budgetary allocations, short of bringing the force up to strength, providing the force with the assets, ensuring the force is properly commanded, and of course, giving the new policemen and serving policemen sufficient training, I think that is the most we can say at this point in time. You need good management, you need good supervision, and the minister has responsibility. He is the person who must come to the National Assembly and give account for his stewardship, and that is why we can't bring a motion against the Commissioner of Police. But it is for the minister to accept responsibility for the mismanagement of the police force.
In your visit to some of our hinterland communities, do you find that our Indigenous brothers and sisters are fearful for their lives, their safety, their livelihood in these communities?
In some cases, yes, because I have spoken to a person in one particular area, and they hear planes landing, not too far from them. Of course, in the open savannas, much in the hinterland, after a while, people can hear things at a great distance. In Georgetown or in the coastline, there's a lot of noise, and it's difficult to hear something that's happening a mile away. But in the hinterland, you can tell a plane is coming sometimes in maybe half an hour. You can tell a boat is on the river. So people hear things, and they know that the movements take place which are not legitimate, and they can tell you, yes, there's cocaine smuggling, yes, there's gun running, yes, there is illegal movement, and they feel unsafe. They feel unsafe. But I would say there's some areas that are so remote that are not affected by that type of lack of security. But in other areas, yes, I would say.
What should a government done, especially in terms of public safety, public security, in 2013, especially since we're in Amerindian Heritage Month, to secure a proper future for our hinterland communities?
Well, I would say the first thing is to ensure Indigenous land rights. And the matter is still unsettled, regardless of what the government is saying. It's unsettled in the Rupununi, it's unsettled in the Pataro Siparuni, it's unsettled in the Kuyuni Mazaruni. I think in those three regions particularly, I'm not sure about what's happening in the Brima region. The second thing is that we need to provide what we call public services, particularly education and health. The state of education is poor. There's no other word that could be used. When you see children in an entire region, that is the Pataro Siparuni region, failing the National Grade 6 examination in such large numbers, you know that something is wrong. When the best student in the entire region gets 468 or some number of points, you know that something is badly wrong. When you see photographs of children fetching logs to cook their meals, you know something is wrong. So we're looking for a higher level of public services, particularly things like education and also health. I know that in some areas like Pomeroon, which might not be considered hinterland, there's no medical boat. So when somebody falls ill up the river, that person cannot be evacuated, cannot be brought out to the hospital. So we need to improve our public services. Thirdly, we need to improve infrastructure. We need to ensure that there is a network of roads, because roads are not a luxury, roads are an investment in development. Once there are roads, people will be able to access the farms. Farmers will be able to bring their produce to markets. Children will be able to go to school. Investors will be able to go in and open new farms, new mines. Tourists will be able to visit. So we need to develop the physical infrastructure, but overall we need to be safe. We need to make sure that the residents of the hinterland, the businessmen who go in, the public servants who work there, teachers, postmen and so on, are secure, and they're not going to be attacked and killed. And it's been happening too frequently. And much of what has been going wrong in the hinterland could be laid at the feet of the People's Progressive Party civic administration.
Providing that the current administration somehow fix these problems, because there continues to be much talk about Guyana becoming a tourist destination, but we all know that the beauty of Guyana is in the hinterland communities. Are you convinced that the hinterland region, can be a good tourist destination, providing that these things are fixed?
Well, I would say it's the best destination in the entire country. There's no other Caribbean country with so many beautiful waterfalls. We have a varied terrain. We have a flat coastline. In some parts of the hinterland, we have hilly country, we have forested regions, we have mountainous regions, we have rivers, as I said, waterfalls. Some areas have lakes. It is a very beautiful country. In addition to that, in addition to the physical landscape, we have beautiful flora and fauna. Some of the world's finest species of birds. For example, the harpy eagle. Many people see the American eagle or the German eagle or the Russian eagle, but the harpy eagle of Guyana and the Amazon is the most powerful eagle in the world. It's the biggest eagle, biggest wingspan. We have one of the biggest freshwater fishes, the arapaima. And when you go into the turtles and other fauna, you would see that Guyana has some of the most impressive fauna in the world. For example, in the Kanuku, there are more species of birds in the Kanuku alone, not the whole of Guyana, in the Kanuku alone, than in the entire Western Europe. So yes, I wouldn't have any hesitation in saying that our hinterland is potentially one of the best tourist destinations in the hemisphere, not only in Guyana, in the hemisphere. But people must get access. There must be proper roads, proper airstrips, and people must feel safe. That there must be a security infrastructure, so that when they go into those areas, they know they're not going to be robbed and killed.
All right. Putting aside infrastructure, putting aside indigenous rights, putting aside security, public safety for the hinterland communities for a bit, are you satisfied with efforts by government to observe and celebrate Amerindian Heritage Month 2013? And were you involved in any way in terms of preparing to observe and celebrate this month?
No, it's a government function. I wasn't involved, but I don't have any criticism of the actual event of having Amerindian Heritage Month. I think it's laudable, and it is something that is worthwhile. I think the whole country, the whole nation should focus on Amerindian heritage. What I do find unsatisfactory is the tokenism that is displayed by the administration and the way they try to make it into a People's Progressive Party that they try to show that they alone are responsible for indigenous development, when in fact they're making a mess of development. Okay. And I think other people feel alienated because the celebrations are, they seem to be exclusive rather than being inclusive. It should be a national celebration because we all have benefited from the indigenous people. We all, most of us eat pepper pot, and most of us eat cassava bread, and most of us, speak a language which some people in the Caribbean don't understand. We can speak about Warishi or Matapi, and they say, what's that, But these are words that we know the meaning of, but they're indigenous words. We know what indigenous folklore has done for the entire country. So the indigenous people are part of Guyanese society. And the PPP should not try to use celebrations to divide. They should use the celebrations to bring our people together. So that is my complaint. But I do believe that we should go on to celebrate it in a big way and ensure that our school children and more of our population are involved.
Finally, sir, we're at the last quarter of 2013. David Granger, a Partnership for National Unity, outlook regarding Hinterland Development 2016. What would you like to see for the hinterland community by the year 2016?
APNU looks forward to a safer hinterland.
Okay.
Safe for the citizen, the residents there, safe for investors, safe for miners, loggers, business persons. We look forward to removing the scourge of trafficking in persons and crime and banditry. We look forward to better physical infrastructure, roads, bridges, and we look forward to better public services, particularly education and health. those are what we look forward to.
Thank you very much, Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and Leader of the Opposition, Mr. David Granger. This has been The Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey, and we were discussing hinterland development. Until next time, thanks for watching.